Prepare yourself for what is about to unfold. The intense, glaring lights of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room cast a stark glow over Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh as he sat rigidly, shifting slightly in his chair with evident discomfort. What was originally scheduled as a routine oversight hearing was on the verge of transforming into one of the most groundbreaking moments in recent judicial history, a moment destined to be remembered and analyzed for years to come. Just a few moments earlier, a new member of Congress, Jasmine Crockett, had entered the chamber carrying a slim folder, blue in color, that initially seemed unnoticed by her colleagues. Yet, Kavanaugh's gaze immediately latched onto it with unmistakable focus, his usual composed demeanor visibly flickering with surprise and agitation. Her presence, calm yet purposeful, marked the beginning of what would become an extraordinary exchange. Crockett, a former civil rights lawyer with a reputation for meticulous preparation and unwavering professionalism, placed that unassuming blue folder carefully on the desk in front of her. The cameras broadcasting the proceedings captured a subtle but telling detail. Kavanaugh's eyes repeatedly darted toward the folder, betraying a mixture of curiosity and concern. What the viewers at home did not yet realize was that hidden inside that modest-looking folder lay a sealed secret, an internal Supreme Court memo, a document never intended for public consumption, containing sensitive internal deliberations regarding a controversial ruling. This memo directly contradicted some of Kavanaugh's previous public statements made during his confirmation process. Scrawled within the margins of the document were handwritten notes in the justice's own handwriting, notes that sharply questioned the consistency of his earlier sworn testimony before Congress. Crockett, with deliberate calm, then announced her intention. "I would like to begin by addressing issues of judicial transparency," she said slowly, as she opened the folder with measured purpose. "Specifically, I want to explore the apparent gap between what justices communicate to Congress during the confirmation process and how they actually behave once seated on the bench." Her voice was steady, her tone respectful, even as the atmosphere thickened with tension, hinting that something significant was about to be revealed. Kavanaugh, unnerved, reached for his glass of water, his hand visibly trembling as he brought it to his lips for a sip, a sign of unprecedented nervousness for a man who was known for his steady composure. The committee chair leaned forward, puzzled by this unusual display of unease from a justice usually so controlled under pressure. Within minutes, a single document extracted from Crockett's folder would ignite a reaction unlike anything ever seen on televised judicial proceedings. The very moment when Justice Kavanaugh's face mask of confidence cracked open would leave millions of viewers around the country and the world stunned. This unexpected event would thrust the Supreme Court into uncharted territory, prompting a level of scrutiny and public debate unprecedented in modern judicial history. Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in both the political arena and the legal community, had climbed the ranks swiftly following a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney in Texas. Known for her sharp legal mind, her unwavering focus, and her unflappable demeanor in tense situations, she had earned her seat on the House Judiciary Committee as a first-term representative, an opportunity perfectly aligned with her background in constitutional law and her commitment to transparency and justice. The committee chair, unaware of the gravity of what was about to happen, announced, "You have 15 minutes for questioning," signaling the start of Crockett's turn to interrogate. Facing her was Brett Kavanaugh, whose nomination to the Supreme Court in the year 2018 had been one of the most fiercely debated confirmations in recent history. After surviving a barrage of accusations regarding his youth and questions about his judicial temperament, Kavanaugh had managed to secure the appointment, establishing himself as a conservative voice on the bench. Yet, the events that day threatened to shake the foundation of trust and transparency that supposedly underpinned his role, exposing fissures that had, until then, remained hidden behind his carefully maintained public image. Over the course of the last 5 years, Justice Kavanaugh Crockett had deliberately chosen to steer clear of the limelight and avoid the relentless, often intrusive glare of public attention. Instead of seeking the spotlight, she preferred to remain within the quiet, secluded corridors of the court, where the complexities of legal debate and judicial decision-making could unfold away from the prying eyes of the media and the general populace. Her approach was to focus steadfastly on her duties, trusting that her work and integrity would speak for themselves, and consciously avoiding the distractions and pressures that come with public scrutiny. As the hearing progressed, the questioning unfolded with a formal yet controlled tone. Justice Crockett initiated the dialogue, addressing a delicate matter with her characteristic tact. During your confirmation hearings, you made several specific commitments about your judicial philosophy, especially regarding the importance of precedent and the stability of settled law. Could you clarify whether your recent rulings and judicial decisions have stayed consistent with those initial assurances? With years of experience behind her, Justice Crockett leaned slightly toward the microphone, embodying the confidence gained from her legal career, yet maintaining an air of impartiality. Her tone was composed, professional, and precise, as she sought candid responses from the nominee. Justice Kavanaugh Crockett responded with a calm demeanor. "Congresswoman, I believe my judicial record speaks for itself." Her voice conveyed certainty and integrity. She continued, emphasizing her approach to each case. "I approach each matter brought before me with an open mind and a dedicated fidelity to the Constitution and the law, just as I pledged I would during my confirmation." Her words reinforced her image of a judge committed to principled reasoning and unwavering adherence to her constitutional duties. Justice Crockett observed her colleague silently, her face an unreadable mask, yet her attention remained sharp and focused. She then posed a follow-up, subtly probing further. "And would you say that your private deliberations with other justices reflect the same commitment you've just described? Do your internal discussions align with what you've publicly stated?" A flicker of uncertainty briefly crossed Kavanaugh's face, an expression that momentarily betrayed her composure. She responded, her tone neutral and measured. "All justices engage in confidential deliberations. That's an essential part of how our court operates." She paused, then added, "Of course, I understand your concern, but I'm asking specifically about the consistency between your public statements and your private positions." Her words were carefully calibrated, seeking clarity without accusations. Unseen by the audience, the circumstances leading up to this tense exchange were anything but ordinary. Merely 3 weeks prior, an anonymous whistleblower from within the clerical staff of the Supreme Court had come forward, approaching Justice Crockett's team with sensitive information, internal documents that hinted at a troubling inconsistency. These documents purportedly contained discussions and memoranda indicating that Justice Kavanaugh had, in private, taken positions during internal deliberations that starkly contradicted his sworn testimony before Congress. When Crockett's team verified the authenticity of these materials through multiple independent sources, the magnitude of the situation became clear. It was a high-stakes decision, one that would change the course of the hearing and potentially expose a serious breach of trust. Faced with this dilemma, Justice Crockett made a calculated choice. It was a gamble that, if successful, could unveil a deep inconsistency, potentially exposing a justice for having deliberately veered from the truth. Her extensive legal background told her that the most powerful cross-examinations often come when the witness has no hint of what's to come, that unexpected revelations can dismantle the most carefully crafted defenses. The risks were enormous. If the document was genuine, it could prove that a Supreme Court justice had, under oath, lied or misrepresented their true stance, potentially undermining the court's credibility and integrity. Yet, if her effort failed, she faced the backlash of appearing to ambush a colleague, an act that could be portrayed as politically motivated or unethical, especially if the documents were stolen or improperly obtained. With meticulous focus, Justice Crockett continued, shifting her attention to a specific and highly sensitive issue rooted in history. Justice Kavanaugh, I am particularly interested in your publicly expressed views during your confirmation hearings concerning the case of Roe v. Wade. You stated that you regarded that decision as settled law and acknowledged it as an important precedent established by the Supreme Court. Her tone was even, but deliberate, as she pressed forward. Kavanaugh nodded in response, displaying a firm, confident demeanor. That was indeed my testimony, he affirmed, his voice steady. Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly as she reached for a blue folder, the weight of her next words clear. She proceeded. However, 2 years before the Department of Justice moved to overturn that decision, you circulated an internal memo among the conservative justices outlining a strategic plan to reverse Roe. In that memo, you described overturning the ruling as an opportunity, a chance to correct what you termed a constitutional error. An almost uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The committee members and the watchers watched intently, their breath held in collective suspense. The face of Justice Kavanaugh froze in a revealing expression, an almost involuntary look of genuine shock, disbelief written plainly across his features. To see a member of Congress, armed with an internal court document, confront him in such a direct and startling manner was unprecedented. His reaction was caught in every detail by the cameras, a mixture of surprise and, perhaps, apprehension. The silence was thick, the tension palpable, as the room and its participants directly confronted the realization that hidden, internal communications had now entered this publicly televised arena. The chair of the committee straightened abruptly, instinctively aware that this unexpected turn of events had shifted the entire atmosphere of the hearing. The meticulous public facade had been disrupted by an internal document, an unprecedented breach of protocol that threatened to reveal deeper, potentially troubling internal divisions or strategies within the Supreme Court itself. This moment marked a dramatic escalation in the proceedings, an extraordinary turning point that none present would soon forget. The moment of confrontation had now been carefully crafted and set in motion, creating a highly charged atmosphere that was almost palpable in the room. At the center of this tense scene stood a freshly minted congresswoman, still new to Capitol Hill, but already displaying the keen instincts of a seasoned prosecutor. Her sharp eye for detail and unwavering resolve suggested she was prepared to confront her opponent with the tenacity of someone who understood the gravity of the stakes involved. Facing her across the room was a venerable Supreme Court justice, known for his calm composure and extensive experience on the bench. However, in this particular instant, an intriguing tension had begun to surface, that of a man who suddenly realized he might be caught in a contradiction of significant magnitude, a discrepancy that could threaten to unravel his previous statements or positions. All around them, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation because everyone present sensed that a moment of historic importance was approaching, one that might redefine some aspects of judicial oversight. The collective gaze of millions of viewers watching this live broadcast was fixed on this unfolding drama, ready to witness what could be an unprecedented event in the long and complex history of the Supreme Court's oversight of the legislative and executive branches of government. It was a scene that, by all accounts, would be remembered as a defining moment, not only due to its immediate implications, but also because it was about to expose a potential fissure in the sworn commitments and statements of a high-ranking jurist. The tension intensified as the Congresswoman, unperturbed, pressed forward, her tone clear but composed as she sought to extract the truth from the justice. After a brief pause, Justice Kavanaugh responded, his voice more strained and noticeably tighter than earlier, betraying a hint of discomfort despite his efforts to maintain outward composure.
"I am not aware of any such memorandum,"
he declared, attempting to dismiss what had suddenly become a very revealing piece of evidence. Yet, even as he spoke, the slight tremor in his hand as he reached once more for a glass of water subtly betrayed his inner unease, hinting that he may have been caught off guard or was struggling to maintain control over his narrative. Meanwhile, the Congresswoman, unimpressed by his immediate denial, nodded slightly as if she had anticipated this reaction and perhaps expected further clarification. Her gesture was deliberate, designed to reinforce her resolve and to signal that she was prepared to proceed with her line of questioning. Without hesitation, she deliberately held up a document for all to see, ensuring that the cameras captured every detail. Her purpose was clear: to demonstrate, beyond any doubt, the existence of a memorandum dated the 15th of March in the year 2020, bearing Justice Kavanaugh's signature at the bottom, and circulated among certain members of the court. She explained that this document had been shared with Justices Thomas, Alito Gorsuch, and later with Justice Barrett, following her confirmation, thereby emphasizing its legitimacy and importance. This revelation immediately sparked a ripple of murmurs and whispers through the committee room, as members began exchanging surprised glances and quiet comments about the implications of such a document being in circulation. The sudden shift in tone drew the attention of the chairman of the committee, who immediately banged his gavel sharply, demanding order and calm amidst the rising noise. Addressing Representative Crockett, the chairman expressed concern.
"If you are referencing confidential Supreme Court documents, I need to understand the origin, the provenance of these materials, how they came to be in your possession." Crockett, maintaining her poise and clarity, responded smoothly and confidently.
"Mr. Chairman," she said, "I am referring to documents that were legally provided to this committee by a whistleblower, an individual concerned about the possibility that false or misleading information had been presented to Congress. These materials are not classified or protected by executive privilege because, as you are aware, Supreme Court deliberations are generally not subject to such restrictions." Her careful language reflected not only her legal background, but also her understanding of the sensitive nature of what she was revealing. She then turned her attention back to Justice Kavanaugh, who had been hastily conferring with his legal counsel, attempting to assess the situation and formulate a response. Crockett, with unwavering calmness, proceeded to quote directly from the memorandum, elaborating on its content. Specifically, the memo states, and I quote, "While public messaging regarding the president is strategically necessary, we have the opportunity with the current court composition to finally correct this constitutional error." She paused momentarily for effect, then posed a pointed question. "Would you care to explain the apparent contradiction between this statement and your earlier testimony to this committee?" The question was sharp, carefully crafted to unveil any inconsistencies. Justice Kavanaugh's face flushed noticeably, a telltale sign of discomfort and perhaps guilt or confusion. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice tinged with defensive hesitation. "Without seeing the full context of the document you're referencing, I cannot possibly comment on selective quotations that might be taken out of context." He sought to distance himself from the specifics, claiming he needed more context before making any definitive statement. Crockett responded promptly, a note of assurance in her tone. "I am happy to provide the full context," she said, turning the page to the next segment of the memorandum. The document continued, elaborating on the proposed strategy. "My suggestion is that we wait for a case without the procedural complications of the Louisiana statute, which would allow us to more directly address the core holding of Roe rather than merely chipping away at its edges." Her words underscored a strategic approach, one aimed at resolving fundamental constitutional issues rather than incremental or superficial changes. She then directed her question again toward the justice. "Does that additional context help your recollection, Justice?" Her tone was calm but assertive, pressing him to clarify his stance. The tension in the room was now nearly tangible, thickening with each passing moment. Members of Congress, both Republican and Democratic, were visibly reacting, some protesting loudly, criticizing what they saw as an unfair or possibly biased presentation of evidence, while others leaned forward intently, eager to see how this dramatic turn would unfold. The chairman, sensing the gravity of what was taking place, attempted to restore order by calling for a point of order. "Mr. Chairman," interrupted a Republican representative, raising a voice sharply to draw attention. "This is an ambush, a setup using potentially stolen or improperly obtained documents. Justice Kavanaugh deserves proper notice of any such allegations before they are thrown into a public proceeding of this nature." His words reflected concern over fairness and procedural propriety. The chairman paused, visibly caught between the necessity to adhere to parliamentary procedure and the explosive nature of the testimony and evidence now on display. The room's atmosphere grew even more intense, charged with the unspoken question of where this confrontation might ultimately lead, and what implications it might hold for the integrity of the judicial process and the confidence of the public in their institutions. The atmosphere in the chamber grew increasingly tense as the committee proceeded with its inquiry. The chair, clearly recognizing the seriousness of the moment, acknowledged the concerns raised but pointed out that the witness was present and fully capable of responding to the specific questions posed. Meanwhile, the procedural debate persisted, with no resolution in sight. Throughout this exchange, the camera's lens remained fixed unwaveringly on Justice Kavanaugh, a figure who initially exuded calm and composure, but was visibly beginning to fracture under the mounting pressure. His legal counsel, sitting beside him, leaned in quietly, whispering urgent remarks into his ear, attempting to bolster his confidence or perhaps prepare him for the difficult questions ahead. Yet, despite the murmured reassurance, the justice's gaze stayed fixed intently on a document fluttering in Crockett's hand, indicating that his focus was unwavering, even as his outward appearance hinted at mounting unease. At this pivotal moment, Crockett, a determined congresswoman, decided to interject, breaking the procedural silence with a pointed statement. She requested permission from the chair to present additional documentation, emphasizing its significance by suggesting that Justice Kavanaugh might find it valuable to review it before answering further. Raising a page from her stack of papers, she revealed a critical email correspondence. The email, dated exactly 1 week after a memo that outlined a strategic approach and explicitly recommended maintaining a level of public ambiguity about certain intentions regarding the case of Roe, was now laid bare before the committee. The email explicitly noted that it would be prudent to sustain a degree of uncertainty in the public discourse until an appropriate case materialized, language that strongly suggested the existence of a concealed or strategic plan. This revelation caused a ripple of audible gasps going through the gallery, the audience reacting with shock and intrigue. The news hit hard, casting a stark light on what many might have suspected but had not previously seen documented so clearly. Meanwhile, the members of Kavanaugh's legal team, seated quietly nearby, scrambled to take notes, their pens moving rapidly as they documented the implications of the newly unveiled correspondence. Justice Kavanaugh, visibly under pressure, sat almost alone under the glaring lights of the chamber, with the relentless cameras capturing every moment. His predicament was becoming increasingly apparent. He appeared more isolated with each passing second, his surroundings amplifying the weight of the moment. Amid this developing crisis, Congresswoman Crockett persisted, and the chairman, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped in to address broader concerns. He expressed a measure of concern over the methods used to obtain the controversial documents, emphasizing the importance of maintaining procedural integrity. However, Crockett, unshaken, responded swiftly and confidently, her tone firm yet respectful. She reminded the committee that the Supreme Court had, on numerous occasions, reaffirmed that the public interest in uncovering potential misconduct often overshadowed concerns about confidentiality, especially when allegations involve misrepresentation or concealment directed at Congress. Her mention of legal precedents was deliberate. She alluded to well-established rulings known to Kavanaugh himself, and her reference to these principles appeared designed to put him in an increasingly difficult position. It was a reminder that the safeguards of precedent bound him, and that he could hardly dismiss the basic tenets of the judicial philosophy he had previously endorsed. Building on this momentum, Crockett shifted focus with a straightforward yet pointed question, aiming to cut through any remaining obfuscation. Locking eyes with the justice, she posed in clear, direct terms. "Did you write this memo in which you outlined strategies for overturning Roe while publicly asserting that the case was settled law?" Her question cut to the core of the controversy, transforming the hearing from an ordinary oversight of judicial conduct into a vital moment of constitutional scrutiny. Every observer in the chamber, and viewers watching from home through the broadcast, recognized the stakes. His response could either affirm his integrity and adherence to truth or reveal the existence of a clandestine plan that directly contradicted his sworn testimony. Justice Kavanaugh, visibly caught off guard, paused briefly, clearly weighing his options. His voice, strained and tinged with hesitation, indicated his awareness of the gravity of his next words. He responded with measured caution, stating, "I need to consult with counsel before providing any further response," before turning aside to whisper urgently to his legal advisor, seemingly aware that the ramifications extended far beyond the moment. The camera captured a close-up of the memo's header, deliberately framed so viewers at home could see the official letterhead of the Supreme Court and, unmistakably, his name. This moment, tense and charged, was unfolding in real time as Kavanaugh engaged in a silent consultation with his attorneys, seeking guidance on how to navigate this precarious situation. After a pause of over 30 seconds, marked by whispered exchanges and intense concentration, Justice Kavanaugh finally turned back to the microphone, his expression one of deliberate composure, yet his inner turmoil was palpable. He attempted a measured response, addressing Crockett directly, with a tone that sought to reaffirm the importance of confidentiality among the justices. While internal deliberations among Supreme Court justices are, of course, confidential for a reason, he said, they serve to facilitate open and honest exchanges of ideas, perspectives, and legal reasoning that are essential for fair decision-making. Crockett, recognizing his attempt to deflect, responded calmly, her tone even and confident. She acknowledged his point, but pressed further, seeking clarity and urging him to confront the real issue at hand.
"I understand," she replied, "that confidentiality is a cornerstone of judicial deliberation. However, my question pertains to how you reconcile your public statements, asserting that Roe is settled law, with private communications that may suggest a different approach. We are not merely discussing abstract legal processes. We are confronting the integrity of the judicial conduct involved in this case." Her words underscored the seriousness of the matter, turning the focus squarely onto the perceived inconsistencies between his sworn public testimony and the private documents that had now come to light. The chamber remained in tight focus, every second thick with anticipation, as the truth, however complex and difficult, began to emerge from the shadows. The unfolding exchange marked a moment of profound constitutional significance,
testing not only Justice Kavanaugh's honesty, but also the very ideals of transparency and accountability that underpin the justice system itself. This memo outlines a carefully crafted strategy designed to achieve a delicate duality, to publicly project one stance while secretly pursuing an entirely different objective behind closed doors. Essentially, it reveals a tactic often employed in high-stakes political and legal circles, where transparency is secondary to strategic maneuvering. The document she produced was just another piece in a series of confidential communications, illustrating how carefully calibrated messaging can serve opposing ends simultaneously. She held up another document, this time a piece of paper that contained detailed minutes of a private meeting among the conservative justices of the Supreme Court. This meeting had taken place back in September of 2020, and within those handwritten notes, a crucial piece of advice was recorded, verbatim. We should exercise caution not to reveal our true intentions publicly until after the upcoming election and the appointment of the new justice. The reference here was specific and strategic. It suggested a deliberate delay in revealing what the conservative bloc truly aimed for, effectively waiting until the political dust had settled. The mentioning of timing, specifically the decision to withhold certain information until after Justice Barrett's confirmation, caused an unmistakable ripple of tension in the hearing room. Several members of the Democratic Committee, who had until that moment perhaps been listening attentively, now appeared visibly struck, exchanging hurried notes among themselves, evidently caught off guard by these revelations that their colleague had chosen to keep secret until this crucial moment. The breath seemed to leave the face of Justice Kavanaugh, whose composure, usually so carefully maintained, was visibly waning. The tranquil judicial demeanor that the Supreme Court justices work hard to uphold was beginning to crack under the weight of Crockett's relentless questioning and the mounting pressure of the concrete evidence she meticulously laid out. Her tone remained calm, professional, and unshaken. Yet, her questions struck at the core of the integrity that the judiciary is supposed to embody.
Justice Kavanaugh, Crockett continued, her voice steady and measured, holding firm amidst the mounting tension. Did you, in a private email correspondence, write to Justice Thomas that, and I quote, "Our public statements about respecting the president have successfully provided the necessary cover for our colleagues facing tough confirmation fights?" She paused, allowing her words to hang in the tense air of the hearing room, emphasizing the weight of the statement. The question lingered for what felt like an uncomfortably long moment, each second packed with the anticipation of an answer. On the Republican side, the members sat motionless, their faces frozen in abject silence, stunned by the potential implications of Crockett's allegation. Several Democratic members, on the other hand, couldn't suppress their reactions. Some let out audible gasps or exchanged disbelieving looks, clearly unprepared for such a bombshell to be dropped during this hearing. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a mixture of shock and anger among those who saw the implications of such a message. Finally, Justice Kavanaugh responded, but his voice lacked its usual authoritative firmness. It was tinged with uncertainty, and you could sense an absence of the judicial conviction he had worn so confidently before. I don't recall such a communication," he managed to say, voice faint and hesitant. His denial was weak. It sounded more like an attempt to dismiss the allegation than a firm refutation backed by certainty. Crockett, however, nodded as if she had anticipated his response, already prepared for this moment. Then, with a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the discomfort in the room, she reached into her folder and held up a printed email, carefully highlighted for emphasis. The document was dated February the 12th, 2021, and came directly from Justice Kavanaugh's official Supreme Court email account.
Would you like me to have this entered into the official record? She asked evenly. The chairman, clearly visibly uneasy with how the hearing had taken a dramatic turn, cleared his throat and announced that the committee would take a 10-minute recess to consider procedural questions. Yet, before the break, Crockett made her move once more. She smoothly interjected with a final request. I'd like to enter one more document into the record. Without missing a beat, she revealed a handwritten note from Justice Kavanaugh addressed to Justice Barrett, congratulating her on her Senate confirmation. The note concluded with a bold statement in his own handwriting. Now we have the votes to overturn Roe, as we've discussed. The camera zoomed in on Kavanaugh's face as he was caught reacting in real time. A quick flinch, followed by a frantic, almost panicked glance toward his legal counsel. A subtle but unmistakable display of the internal conflict he was experiencing. This candid reaction was striking, the kind of unscripted, unguarded moment that Supreme Court justices, expert at maintaining serene, impartial exteriors, almost never show in public. The note's date, which was in November of 2020, placed it only weeks after Justice Barrett's confirmation, yet more than a year and a half before Justice Kavanaugh had joined the majority opinion in a case named Dobbs, which controversially overturned the federal precedent on abortion rights, a decision that many saw as ultimately rooted in the justice's personal views rather than a strict constitutional interpretation. Those facts unravel significant questions about how judicial decisions are influenced by undisclosed conversations and strategic planning, challenging the presumed impartiality of the highest court in the land. As Crockett's voice faded with the sound of the gavel marking the start of the recess, it became painfully clear that the damage had already been done. The nation's viewers, sitting in their living rooms and workplaces, had just witnessed a moment that would leave an indelible mark on their collective consciousness. Not only had they been presented with a trove of documents that shed new light on a highly controversial issue, but they also had the rare, raw eyewitness account of Justice Kavanaugh's visceral reaction to what was then unfolding before him. His physical response, an involuntary wince, a fleeting look of surprise, perhaps a hint of unease, conveyed messages far more powerful than any carefully crafted words could ever hope to express. In that fleeting, unguarded moment, it was as if the very foundation of the justice's credibility was beginning to tremble and crack right on live television, unfolding in real time before a nationwide audience, eager to process each new development. When the committee members reconvened precisely 10 minutes later, the atmosphere within the chamber had shifted dramatically. The confident, poised jurist who had entered earlier seemed entirely transformed. That familiar air of assuredness and calm professionalism had been replaced by a visibly altered demeanor, an individual now clearly engaged in an intense effort to manage a mounting crisis. His expression showed signs of strain, and his posture suggested a readiness to navigate rough waters. It was obvious to all that Justice Kavanaugh was no longer in the comfortable zone of legal debate. Instead, he was now deeply immersed in damage control, trying to contain the unfolding controversy and its potential repercussions. The committee's chair, with a calm yet firm tone, addressed the witness directly. Mr. Chairman, before we proceed further, I would like to make a brief statement, Kavanaugh announced, his voice notably more measured and controlled. This change in tone indicated that he likely used the recess to prepare himself, perhaps even to craft a coherent response to the barrage of questions and accusations. It's common within the judicial universe that deliberations among justices involve careful exploration of a range of legal perspectives and potential strategies, discussions kept confidential away from public eyes. Such internal exchanges do not necessarily indicate personal beliefs or final judgments, but serve as part of the complex process of legal reasoning. Justice Crockett listened thoughtfully and then directed her most pointed inquiry. Her question cut to the core of the controversy. Justice Kavanaugh, are you implying that when you testified under oath before this committee that you considered Roe v. Wade to be settled law, and yet at the same time authored memoranda discussing ways to overturn it, you were merely exploring different legal positions? The question's tone was sharp, highlighting a stark contradiction, the implication being that his public declarations and private memos appeared fundamentally at odds with each other. The clarity and directness of this question left Kavanaugh with little room to maneuver. His response, or rather the silence that ensued, lasted several tense seconds as millions of viewers held their breath, witnessing what many would later describe as the most damaging moment of the entire hearing process. In the wake of that exchange, the aftermath was immediate and far-reaching. Within mere minutes after the hearing concluded, the infamous memoranda authored by Kavanaugh, often referred to as the Kavanaugh memos, began trending across every corner of the internet. Clips of the intense confrontation were swiftly circulated on social media platforms, sparking widespread discussion and analysis. News outlets interrupted their regular programming to delve into the significance of what had transpired, with many commentators labeling this event as perhaps the most consequential instance of congressional oversight involving the Supreme Court in recent history. The coverage was intense and urgent, as experts from diverse political backgrounds weighed in to interpret the implications of these revelations. Major newspapers convened urgent editorial meetings to prepare special editions that would cover the developing story in depth. One headline in the Washington Post succinctly captured the gravity of the situation. Constitutional crisis. Kavanaugh documents reveal potential contradictions in testimony. The New York Times followed with its own compelling headline. Supreme Court Justice at Crossroads. Private memos clash with public statements. Legal scholars, constitutional experts, and political analysts flooded television screens, appearing across cable news channels and talk shows, each offering their perspective on the mounting scandal. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe described the moment as a seismic event for judicial accountability, emphasizing how fundamentally the incident challenged existing norms of judicial integrity. Conversely, conservative legal analyst Jonathan Turley acknowledged that, should these documents be verified, they raise serious questions about the sincerity and honesty of Justice Kavanaugh's sworn statements. The novelty of this situation did not go unnoticed. Court watchers and legal observers pointed out that the revelation was unprecedented in the history of the judiciary. CNN's Joan Biskupic offered insight, explaining, "The Supreme Court has long operated with extraordinary confidentiality. What the public has known about its internal processes has often been limited to official statements and decisions." She added that what Congresswoman Crockett revealed was not just about one judge's credibility, but potentially exposed broader issues about how judicial nominations and confirmations have been strategically approached by nominees wary of revealing their true legal intentions. Meanwhile, the White House issued a carefully crafted statement, attempting to manage the fallout and frame the unfolding controversy within the larger context of national judicial integrity and political responsibility. The entire episode marked a stark deviation from the norm, drawing widespread attention to the often opaque world of high-level judicial deliberations, and opening a new chapter in the ongoing debate over transparency, accountability, and the delicate balance of power among branches of government. The president firmly believes in the fundamental independence of the judiciary, asserting that judges must remain free from external pressures and influence, and also in the integrity of the congressional oversight process, which serves as a vital check and balance within the government. These convictions, however, are now clouded by a series of serious allegations that have sparked intense public debate and demands for thorough investigation. Such claims are no trivial matter. They strike at the core of the justice system's credibility and necessitate careful probing through proper legal and institutional channels to establish the facts with clarity and fairness. In response to recent developments, supporters of Justice Kavanaugh acted swiftly to defend his reputation and legitimacy. A rally of his advocates appeared in rapid succession, raising questions about the origins of certain controversial documents that had come to light. They argued that these papers might have been fabricated, deliberately taken out of context, or obtained illegally, all tactics that could severely undermine the judicial process. Judicial crisis networks, with prominent figures like Carrie Severino from Fox News, publicly voiced their concerns, asserting that the entire situation seemed to be a politically motivated attack aimed at damaging the justices' standing. They viewed the exposure of these documents and the subsequent reactions not as isolated incidents, but as part of a broader scheme to discredit a fair and impartial judiciary. However, the visual evidence of Justice Kavanaugh's reaction during the proceedings proved to be particularly powerful and difficult to dismiss. The high-definition footage captured an expression of apparent panic and distress that replayed repeatedly across media platforms, leaving a lasting impression on viewers. Many experts specializing in body language and nonverbal communication analyzed the footage closely, with one prominent analyst indicating to MSNBC that what they observed was a textbook example of someone confronted unexpectedly with evidence they hadn't anticipated. These physical reactions, the facial expressions, the shifts in posture, the subtle signs of nervousness, could not easily be dismissed as mere nerves or misinterpretations. They appeared to reveal discomfort and perhaps a sense of being caught off guard. The aftermath of these revelations brought about a dual response, especially for Congresswoman Crockett, who was directly involved in raising questions about the leaked documents. On the one hand, she was celebrated by progressive groups and advocates of judicial accountability as a hero, praised for her role in holding the judiciary to higher standards and seeking transparency in its processes. On the other hand, conservative organizations swiftly responded with ethics complaints, accusing her of mishandling sensitive court documents or engaging in actions that could compromise the integrity of the judicial system. The intense scrutiny did not stop at her. Financial support for legal defense efforts quickly poured in from both sides of the ideological spectrum, with millions of dollars raised within just a few days to support the legal defenses of both Crockett and an unnamed whistleblower involved in leaking the documents. The impact of these events stretched far beyond the confines of a single congressional hearing, igniting a broader institutional crisis. Chief Justice John Roberts announced an internal investigation to identify the source of the leaked documents, attempting to protect the court's reputation while defending its deliberative processes. Meanwhile, the Senate Judiciary Committee's chair, Dick Tin, called for hearings to establish standards of candor for judicial nominees, demanding greater accountability and transparency. Concurrently, several members of the House of Representatives swiftly drafted and introduced a legislative proposal known as the Judicial Transparency Act. This legislation aimed to impose new requirements for disclosure and public reporting of conflicts, financial interests, and other relevant details associated with Supreme Court justices, seeking to curb any future breaches of confidentiality. Deeply engaged in this unfolding crisis were constitutional scholars and legal analysts, raising profound questions that struck at the heart of American constitutional traditions. The most urgent of these was, what should be done if credible evidence suggests that a sitting Supreme Court justice might have been less than truthful during the confirmation process? Such a scenario would challenge the fundamental constitutional standard of good behavior, which, in theory, entitles justices to hold office for life unless they are impeached and removed for misconduct. Yet, this standard had rarely, if ever, been tested in such a high-profile context, leaving the legal community to debate at length what remedies might be appropriate. Legal blogs and academic forums exploded with commentary and suggestions, some proposing that only impeachment could effectively address the situation, while others considered whether sustained public pressure and political accountability might lead to a resignation before impeachment proceedings even became necessary. Law schools responded quickly, with ethics classes hastily revising their syllabi to incorporate the case of Justice Kavanaugh's alleged misconduct as a pivotal example of constitutional crisis and judicial ethics. It became a mandatory reading for future legal professionals eager to understand the complex interplay of law, morality, and politics. Public opinion polling sectors also recorded immediate impacts, revealing how dramatically trust in the Supreme Court had already declined and how the recent events further accelerated this trend. A Gallup poll conducted just 2 days after the hearing revealed that the level of public confidence in the court had plummeted to an unprecedented low of just about 18%, while a substantial majority of Americans, approximately 76%, believed that the court had become excessively politicized and partisan. 1 week following the contentious hearing, in a move that not only surprised but also shocked many political observers in Washington, Justice Kavanaugh announced his decision to temporarily recuse himself from certain categories of cases related to the leaked documents. This step was undertaken while an investigation into the authenticity and origins of the documents continued. Remarkably, this limited recusal marked the first time a sitting Supreme Court justice had voluntarily stepped back from hearing particular cases for such reasons. Many interpreted this action as an attempt by the justice to alleviate mounting pressure and restore some measure of public trust, all while carefully avoiding an outright admission of any wrongdoing. The move was widely discussed as a cautious effort to navigate the delicate situation without escalating it further or risking impeachment proceedings, which could threaten the stability of the court and its independence. The long-term consequences of this unfolding controversy sparked a wave of intense speculation among observers and experts alike. Many turned to history and legal precedents, drawing parallels with a particularly notorious episode from the era of Franklin D. Roosevelt, when the Supreme Court faced pressure to expand its size, a situation often referred to as the court-packing controversy. Legal historians went further, analyzing how external forces and political maneuvers had historically influenced the court's doctrines and decisions. It was suggested that, just as in the past, we might be witnessing another pivotal moment, a switch in time that effectively saved the court's traditional composition of 9 justices from reform efforts perceived as threatening its independence. This phrase, evocative of a crucial turning point in Supreme Court history, was invoked by experts like Yale Law School professor Kavanaugh, who reflected on the historical pattern where courts have changed course to avoid drastic institutional reforms that could undermine their authority and stability. For ordinary Americans, this episode became more than just a legal or political event. It crystallized their mounting concerns about the perceived erosion of trust in institutions that once seemed removed from the tumult of partisan politics. Citizens watching these developments saw the judiciary, long regarded as a neutral arbiter of justice, coming under scrutiny as never before. As one widely circulated tweet, quickly collecting over 1 million likes, succinctly summarized this sentiment, asking, "When judges have secret agendas, do we really have rule of law?" The implication was clear. Transparency and integrity in the judicial branch are foundational to the very notion of the rule of law, and any breach of this trust raises serious questions about the legitimacy of the judiciary. Approximately 2 months after a crucial hearing that propelled this debate into the national spotlight, the truth finally began to emerge from an unexpected source. In a detailed feature published by The Atlantic magazine, an anonymous whistleblower chose to step forward, an individual who had previously served as a clerk at the Supreme Court. This former clerk described feeling morally compelled to disclose certain documents after witnessing a stark discrepancy between the public reassurances issued by the court and the private plans that were being orchestrated behind the scenes. The revelations reignited widespread discussions about the ethics involved in whistleblowing, especially in the context of safeguarding institutional confidentiality. The question of whether loyalty to the court or to the broader public interest should take precedence became central to ongoing debates, highlighting the delicate balance between transparency and discretion within the judicial system. However, the most profound and enduring impact of this episode was not rooted in any immediate policy modifications or legislative reforms. Instead, it laid the groundwork for a deep-seated transformation in how the American public perceives and interacts with the process of judicial nominations and confirmations. In the wake of these revelations, senators from both major political parties began to approach the confirmation hearings with a noticeably different attitude. They started demanding more precise and concrete commitments from nominees, rather than accepting vague assurances or diplomatic evasions. skepticism regarding broad promises from presidential candidates became more openly expressed, signaling a shift toward a more demanding and scrutinizing approach designed to ensure accountability. Melissa Murray, a well-respected constitutional law professor whose analysis gained widespread recognition, observed that the confrontation involving Justice Kavanaugh and Senator Crockett had permanently altered the dynamic between Congress and the judiciary. Her perspective emphasized that, for the first time in recent history, the era of nominees sidestepping substantive questions with carefully crafted non-answers appeared to be coming to an end. This marked a significant departure from previous practices, signaling a new era in which judicial appointees would be expected to provide clear positions on critical issues. Jasmine Crockett, a newly elected congresswoman who had dedicated considerable effort to preparing thoroughly for her moment in the spotlight, exemplified this shift. Her approach, marked by meticulous preparation and unwavering resolve during the hearings, gained her both professional recognition and personal challenges. The threats to her safety, such as death threats, necessitated heightened security measures, and numerous legal efforts related to her handling of sensitive documents consumed substantial resources. Despite the adversity, Crockett's resolute stance echoed her closing statement at the hearing, where she emphasized the fundamental principle that, when core rights and freedoms are at stake, the American people deserve complete honesty and transparency from those entrusted with safeguarding the Constitution, especially individuals who hold lifetime appointments to the bench. What initially began as a seemingly minor struggle over a blue folder resting on a committee room desk evolved into a profound national debate. This incident became a catalyst for a broader reckoning with issues of judicial transparency and accountability, raising fundamental questions about where the boundaries should lie between necessary confidentiality, such as court deliberations and sensitive information, and the imperative for open, honest communication in a functioning democracy. The controversy underscored that, in a nation committed to the rule of law, the integrity of the judicial system depends largely on the trust that Americans can place in its processes and personnel. As the story unfolded, it became clear that this was no longer merely about individual documents or procedural delays, but about the very spirit of transparency and accountability that underpins the American constitutional order.